Um, okay. We're going to be talking about buying and selling clothes online. We're going to go over some different apps and things to consider as you're going about this process. And yeah, my name's Kat, and I'm a programming librarian. And yeah, I've been, I think, buying like used clothes and going and shopping at thrift stores probably since I was like 12. And I just thought it was always one of the most interesting ways to buy clothes. So yeah, I'm really excited to talk today. Yeah, Daisy.
I think I've also had that thing where like I just grew up kind of like always using things until like they literally couldn't last anymore, like hand-me-downs, the thrift store, always hunting for a good deal. Like I just kind of grew up with that. So it's cool to see kind of how it's changed and how we're doing it more online now and kind of like how to do that stuff, which is why we're going to talk about it today. We're going to get started probably about 1:05, just give some people a little bit of time to come in. But I did want to ask, and you can type your answers in the chat, like how many of you have tried buying or selling stuff on like online, and not like from the big stores, but like from either one of the platforms that we're talking about, like Poshmark or Depop, maybe even Facebook Marketplace. Okay, Yvonne says that they haven't tried doing that yet.
Well,
Okay, Esther says they haven't either.
yeah, I like it because they're, especially if it's like an item that like people want. Um, it sometimes like just doing a really bare bones listing, like it'll still work out. And so there's a lot of room to come into this, like I think as like a novice. And yeah, I think it's approachable in that way that like at the end of the day, people are looking for stuff they want. So, oh, eBay, yeah. I've
That's
yeah,
I think a really
classic.
classic place. Yeah, that's exactly what I was gonna say.
I honestly find myself using it a lot. Still, yeah, there's just everything.
Yeah. I think we all know that kind of struggle of going to the store and like you have to physically search every single item that they have in there sometimes, especially if you're at a thrift store. Like you can't just like walk in there and pick something up and know it's what you want. So the kind of like benefits of online is like you can really like search for specific brands, specific like materials. So there's kind of like, and you don't have to leave your house to do it, or like you can do it on the go. You can set up an automatic search, you know, to like alert you when stuff is posted. Okay, we got some, see, I have people who are like Poshmark. Awesome. It's about time to get started if you're ready, Kat.
Yeah.
All right. We're gonna move on to the first slide.
Okay, so some reasons probably, I think you all know because you're here, but like some things to consider, like if you're thinking about starting to sell things online. So first off, like it's extra money, which is great, especially if you have things that are in good condition that are kind of just taking up space. And you know, I kind of just always think of it as like purchases that like you've made your peace with, like you're like, I've worn this enough. I've had this a while, and you know, something that you're like ready to part with, but like still has some use in it. And I think that's a really easy way to get started. But yeah, so I think, where were we? Sorry. Yeah, minimizing your closet also. I was talking about this before we started, but I live in a studio apartment. I do not have a closet. So minimizing and being like really considerate when I'm like bringing new things in, I think has been really important to kind of deal with the not having a closet and loving clothes. So yeah, a way to minimize, I think, is important, especially if you live in a small apartment. And then yeah, just kind of the like sustainability aspect. And you know, there are other things to consider, like when we're talking about sustainability, and we'll kind of get into some of those later. But like, for the most part, like you can consider that like the carbon, footprint and output from buying clothes online that already exist versus like continuing to like manufacture them. I think it definitely does have an effect, and like I think is still like a meaningful action to do. And I think especially with just kind of really like thinking hard about what you're bringing in and what you want to keep and things like that. And then yeah, I think the last one is just kind of obvious. Like if you just want to kind of refresh your look, or like if you have an event and or something coming up that like you're like, I don't want to wear anything that I really already own. I think that's also a great time to kind of start the buying and selling process, just as a way to kind of keep things fresh. Especially my sister, I think it's kind of excessive, but my sister doesn't like to, like if she's already taken a lot of photos in something, she's like ready to like move on. I don't think about that as much, but yes, it's just sometimes I think it's time. So yeah.
I went backwards. 1 second. Okay, and then one thing to like really think about and like really pay attention to, and sometimes we don't, is like before you even start, making sure you like look whatever platform that you end up choosing to use, look at the terms of service. That's important because you don't want to get kicked off the platform. I think generally you want to avoid kind of any disciplinary action or being kicked off. Then it's going to kind of like make it a little bit more difficult for you, especially if you were doing really well on that platform. So always look at the terms of service. Always look at the prohibited items. So what items that platform doesn't allow you to sell. You don't want to, get into any trouble. And then if you're selling, we're going to focus a little bit here on selling. Look at what kind of protections you have as a seller, right? If somebody's like payment doesn't go through, like, will your platform make sure you get reimbursed? Things like that. Like, what kind of protections do you have? That's really important to think about before you start.
Yeah. And I think always just kind of before you, just check the box and kind of move on from the fine print, especially when you're, yeah, kind of wanting to find a consistent platform to do this kind of stuff on. Just always worth a glance, or even just kind of Googling like people's like opinions on the platform too, if you just kind of want to get a better sense of like who's using it and what are they using it for, and yeah, fees and stuff. But yeah, so like whenever I think you're getting ready to start anything kind of like this on a consistent basis, you need to check and kind of make sure that like it's possible to have all of these things. And I actually didn't add this to the slide, but I should also put time, depending on, how much you are listing or how much people are buying. It takes time to go to the post office. So that's something else I would add to the list, but you definitely you need internet access and pretty consistent. A lot of platforms, if someone's trying to message you about an item, or if they've bought an item, but maybe you didn't notice the notification. And so a platform kind of starts, getting into the situation and deciding what's going on if you're not shipping it in a certain amount of time. And when you're photographing, I think that's also a big part of how to get more sales and kind of more activity on your posts. And so having some kind of backdrop and a tripod is also really important. And we mentioned shipping supplies, and so there's a couple different ways I do this, but most platforms will provide you a shipping label. And so also being able to print that label, I think is another thing. But yeah, I tend to use the priority mail flat rate envelopes and boxes at the post office. I think for me the most convenient thing to do, and you can kind of get away with it being a little overstuffed, as long as it will close and it fits. So I think that's a great option. And then also, depending on like how much shipping as a seller you're kind of paying for, like with Depop, one of the platforms we're going to talk about today, I can just print the label and I put it in like shipping that I've already received. So usually if I order something else online, I'll try to reuse that whenever I'm sending stuff out. And so I have a printer at home. It's kind of old and it's heavy, but I still keep it just so I can always print those labels, and that's really all I use it for. But yeah, so I can just print a label, put it in the box, and just take it to the post office. And I don't really have to worry about doing the rest of it or waiting in line or anything. Okay. So the next thing we're going to talk about is good listings. I've gotten into some of the aspects you might want to think about when you're doing this. But I've spent a lot of time on these apps and platforms, especially during the pandemic. I've always loved fashion, so having a lot of time where I was like maybe not wanting to look at the news, or wanting to shop, but I know that I didn't have much money. So I spent a lot of time looking at things. And so I think, like I said before, if your item is good enough or if people want it, sometimes these things don't matter. But I will say definitely, like, if you can try to kind of incorporate some of the like suggestions we have listed, your item probably will get more activity and sell quicker. But I think key is having multiple pictures of the item at different angles. So just so people can get an idea about the fit of the garment all the way around. And good lighting, I think, is also key. I try to use like daylight a lot, so I don't have to deal kind of maybe with like fluorescent lights or other lights, but making sure the person can see the item clearly and get a sense of the fabric and texture and things like that. And again, it's not necessarily saying your garment won't sell, but if you can steam them or iron them or just make sure they're not wrinkly before you take the picture too, that can just be another quick way to help a lot with your listing getting activity. And I think for me, this is key. And I think for most of like my online purchases, the description and the notes they include is really key for me. And that's kind of, the photos are important, but just getting really kind of to the heart of all the item details, since kind of making up for the fact that you're not in person. And it can just be a way to kind of better confirm that you really want an item to kind of make sure that you feel like you know all the measurements, you can kind of imagine what the garment will feel like or fit like, and just kind of really doing a mental checklist, whether like you're buying or selling. So like I said, item measurements, clear photos, and I think also information about the item, like when you got it or where you got it, or if it was made in a particular place, or just any kind of thing that can help people like better place and like contextualize an item. And I think too, if there's anything, I think some people are hesitant about this, but I think it's honestly better to just be upfront if there are any flaws or snags or missing pieces. Maybe you're selling a dress that used to have a belt, but you don't know where that belt is anymore. Things like that, just so it kind of just will ensure that when someone's buying the item, they know exactly what they're getting and they're not going to then wanting to return it. Oh yeah, I see a question. So buzzwords and tags. I think for me, the brand is, I think if you're using Depop or even Poshmark sometimes, that can be one of the ways people are finding items. Like if it's, a shirt from Madewell, just kind of making sure that that's in the description and that's like, usually there's an option to choose a brand when you're listing. And so I think for me, when I'm using them, I often go straight to a brand. And exactly, yes, new with tags is a good one. New without tags, new in box, which is NIB. Those are also good words to use. Daisy, do you have other thoughts?
I think it's making sure when you're making your set, like your listing, a lot of these platforms already have ways to like add the categories. So make sure
Yes.
you fill those out. So like if you've got a dress and you know the material of it, like, and you can do those categories, choose them because people search that way. Like, so basically any sort of way that you can get your item into those like searches so that people can see them, do it. Like take the time because
Yeah.
it's worth it in the end. And I think we can talk a little bit about the two listings that we put up here.
Oh,
Nothing
yeah.
against the sellers or anything. It's
Mm-mm.
just they don't do their garments justice. So the
Exactly.
maroon one here on the, I guess for me, it's the right of the
Hmm.
screen. It's actually a dress, but you can't tell at all with the pictures. So it looks
Hmm.
like it's just on top of some kind of like gauze or something. And the other one actually has two items, and neither of them are actually ever like folded out completely. So
Mm-mm.
like you can't kind of see them, and it's an okay listing, but I don't think it's very inspired. I don't think it makes me want to buy them.
Yeah. Well, right, because honestly, like I think until now, I didn't even notice that there was another jacket behind the white one in this listing. That's my bad, but it just because of the carpet, that's not really what your eyes are drawn to. So having a neutral background, I think, can be key too. And yeah, with the jackets folded, you really don't know what kind of jacket it is or what it's going to look like.
Yeah.
And yeah, the dress on, oh, sorry.
I'm gonna like switch over the slide to some like really cool listings.
Okay, yeah, no, that's a good idea.
And so we chose these listings because they kind of have a little bit of variety, but they're kind of the things that we see that do well
Mhm.
on platforms. So the first image, it's just a simple background, right? It's just like a pink curtain or something. They seem to have, so these are from Depop actually. These listings we got off of Depop. Are they all from Depop? I don't remember.
Yes.
Yeah, so I think these are all from Depop, but generally this is about what like most of the platforms look like. There's not really like a ton of variety when it comes to that kind of design. But so the first image, the person is wearing them and they've styled the garment. But then you see that there's more images. When you keep going, they'll show the garment like as it is without being styled. And then you can see like they've got a little bit of description, and they have the model's measurements. So that way
Oh,
you can
yes.
compare it to your measurements, which is actually a really good idea. The second
Yeah.
one, that seller uses the same background on all their listings. So when you look at their shop, there's a lot of cohesiveness. So they're
Mhm.
not wearing the item, but the item is like it's at least pressed or something. So you can kind of see it really well.
Mhm.
And then same in the next pictures, they'll just kind of show you more, maybe like a couple of different angles and stuff like that. It's got the measurements listed right away. It's a wrap
Yeah.
skirt.
And I think I love when I encounter places that do use the same background because it does give a feeling like you are in a store or one place. And it sounds kind of weird, but I think just when people, it's such a visual experience looking at these apps. So anytime the listings or things like that can kind of appeal to that. Yeah, with just by using kind of the same fabric behind every item.
Third item. So this one actually, this kind of listing takes a little bit of maybe like Photoshop, photo editing skills, but it is a really like common way that we see people do the item, which is like they basically edit out everything from the background and you just see kind of like the item floating. Um, and that is like, I think that's a good way if you like either can't model the clothes or don't
Mhm.
want to. I think this is a way that also appeals to people. And if you see the notes, they actually kind of give some details about, first of all, that it's a rare vintage item is like the first thing that you see. And then they give the brand. And then later on, they give some like a little bit more description, but like that's important is if it's rare, if it's vintage, if it's luxury, to like put that in their notes. And then the last one, I think it's really kind of similar to the first one, but they've chosen a more neutral background. They don't show like the whole person's face or anything. I got a question. Is it better to hang the clothes or put them flat? I think you can do either.
Yeah.
You just have to make sure that like the item looks good no matter like which way you use. So like in that picture with
Yeah.
the midi skirt, it's you can tell it's not wrinkly and there's really good lighting. So, and it's just, that one's just hanging and it looks great. Like it makes me want to buy it. If I could, I would. So you can use either. And we've seen good listings of like, of both. Just make sure that the item looks nice, essentially, whichever way you choose.
Yeah. And I think too, something, and you can't always just, sometimes it's a little more nuanced, but I think it also makes a difference with if you're hanging it up or lying it down, like trying your best, like how much of the item can I get in the photo? You know, if it's a very long dress, sometimes it's a little harder to get it in one shot. And so maybe in that situation, focusing, you know, having the first photo be kind of a closer up and then further away. I think just giving it kind of a dynamic views of it, since again, yeah, like a maxi dress may be hard to fit in one frame and really be able to see it. So I think, yeah, it just depends. And also I was going to say too, a great way to just kind of learn more too is to just play around and to just kind of do test searches, just kind of to get an idea of how other people are doing it. So this is me, right, Daisy? Okay, thank you. So I guess again, I'm kind of really into the descriptions. I think that can really be a way to get someone to linger and consider something. And so obviously putting the brand name if there is one, especially if it's a well-known brand. Excuse me. I was outside earlier and now my allergies.
Oh no.
Okay. So another thing I think can really help kind of with the listing too is if you know the material, and especially if it's a material that people kind of seek out. If something is silk, I think it's definitely great to put that it's silk, like that will make someone more inclined to buy it. And even if maybe it's like the material isn't being used as a selling point, just putting it again can kind of give people like an understanding of how the clothes are going to feel when they're wearing them. Just kind of replacing that tactile ness that would happen if you were in a store. And so yeah, the item measurements, I like to usually do across the chest and the length of the item, I think are the most key, just so kind of people can orient on where it's going to fit on each part of their body. And I think too, especially if you're selling vintage things, the year or the decade the garment is from too, I think is another way people search. You know, sometimes people really are specifically after like a 1970s style, you know, kind of hippie dress. And so kind of putting 70s or even if you have a more specific year, I think that can help a lot too. And yeah, I kind of ended just by saying details that help tell the story of the item. I think people like to feel like they have the best idea of it before they buy it. And especially if people are collectors or looking for specific things, the year, the designer, things like that can be really important. So.
And Yvonne, so the year really, really only matters for like, I would say very rare vintage, hard to find items, or something that is like maybe wasn't popular when it was produced, but now is in high demand, and you know the year. For like most general, like everyday clothes, stuff that we buy like at the mall, it
Yeah.
doesn't really matter the date. But if it's like the other day, I saw a vintage, what was it? Calvin Klein dress. And they put the year because it was vintage and people would be able to look up that collection. And sometimes you don't even have to put exact year. A lot of the times people who buy vintage stuff will never know the exact year. They can only guess. So they'll say mid 1980s, right? Or early 90s, late 2000s. Yeah. So yeah, exactly. If somebody
Yeah.
is either into, so I think vintage starts now
10
at like
years. I thought 10 years or older.
I think now we're at like in the 2000s. Anything pre 2000s or something like that, pre 2010 is vintage.
Yeah, it's usually about a decade. Which yeah, it's like it's usually exactly. I was gonna say it's kind of startling when you're like, oh yeah, I have had this 11 years. And but at the same time, like I think now I think we're in a time period where people really love to mix and match what they're wearing. And so it's worth noting, yeah, if you have it. And I think, but yeah, otherwise, I think like if it's just from, J. Crew and Madewell, like it's probably fine to just list it because a lot of times people are going after, the brands and the quality with those situations.
Yeah, it kind of like literally everything is like it just depends on the item.
And yeah,
But there
that's
are some
yeah.
like general guidelines we can give you to help with that. I'm gonna go ahead and move on to the next slide. So now we're going to actually talk about some of these platforms that you can sell. And we've already talked a little bit about like Poshmark and Depop, but we're going to talk a little bit more like in depth. I think we're only going to cover 3 in depth today, just because of time and stuff. But if you have questions about other ones, we'll try to answer as much as we can. And the first one I wanted to talk about is Poshmark. So on the phone, the image is like what Poshmark kind of looks like. And so you can see there's got like, you probably had like a search for J. Crew items and it's telling you, hey, there's new stuff in that tag. You probably like, if you follow somebody's closet there, you're going to see what they've just posted recently to their closet. So Poshmark has a 20% fee. And that's important because if you want to make $20 off a garment you put on Poshmark, you have to add $2 extra to cover your fee, right? So you always have to think about how, and like, I think 20% is one of the higher fees. Some platforms don't have a fee or they'll have like 10%, or it'll be depending on your item, stuff like that. But Poshmark, I would recommend this for like mid to high end contemporary brands. So Madewell, Zara, things like that. And Kat uses Poshmark. So if you have any insights or insider tips, let us know. But it is, I think, generally like a platform where you can sell a wide variety of clothes and brands, even a little bit of home goods and stuff like that.
Yeah, like people, and it again depends on how you feel about this, but yeah, people do sell like a nice candle that hasn't been used and things like that also show up. But yeah, someone just knocked on my door, excuse me. But Poshmark, I was going to say too, when you're buying something, people, I'm so sorry, I lost my train of thought. Oh yes, when you're buying something, the seller has about 7 days to send it out. And then at that point, the buyer is able to kind of say, I don't want this item anymore and cancel it. And so that can happen, especially like if maybe you just forgot to look at your Poshmark notifications or something like that. So that, I think that's something to be aware with that. And yeah, I think Poshmark is really great. Like, I feel like there's a pretty quick turnover. So that can sometimes compensate for the fee, just if you are kind of really looking to move things quickly in and out.
And then, okay, yeah, users can kind of like negotiate with you on the price. You have protected payments. So, that's something to consider. And also like a cool feature that they have is free luxury authentication, which basically means that some sort of like expert has looked at your item and said, hey, yes, this is like an authentic item. And that authentication gives buyers more confidence to buy the item. So it can help your item sell faster. That's something to consider. Any questions about Poshmark before we move on? Okay, we don't have questions about Poshmark specifically, but we do have, okay, so Yvonne asked about Facebook Marketplace to sell clothes. I know someone who sold a purse there. So Okay, the plus side of Facebook Marketplace is that they don't charge you a fee, right? So you get to keep all of the profit. However, there's like no, you have to negotiate with the buyer, like the shipping fee and how you're going to get it to them, whether it's going to be a pickup or drop off. So you have to put in a lot of the legwork. And I think honestly, for selling individual items, Facebook Marketplace might not be the best place. If you're selling a box of like baby clothes that's like 0 to 6 months, I think that'll sell pretty quickly. People are looking for that kind of stuff. But if you want to sell like a luxury good or something, I don't think Facebook Marketplace is the platform where people are looking for those kinds of goods. Okay, and the next question I saw was somebody was trying to sell 5 Renaissance dresses. Honestly, I think maybe Depop would be the place.
Yeah, and noting costumes too, because people are looking for that kind of thing. And I
Mhm.
think if your town doesn't have a costume store, it can be kind of hard to get a hold of it, especially during Halloween. I think people are going to Depop and other platforms to kind of build costumes. And so maybe, yeah, putting Renaissance or even like, medieval style, even if that's not quite time accurate, and just kind of other kind of buzzwords like that people would kind of search if they were looking for something like that.
Yvonne asked, how do you know if a buyer is legit or a seller? How do you know if the buyer is legit? Yeah, usually you can, on a lot of these platforms, you can like rate transactions and stuff like that.
So the scarves. So were we gonna do the real Daisy?
I don't think I made a slide specifically on the
Okay.
Real, but I was going to talk about it. The
What's-
Real, and
what's
if you
the
want to do
fee
it
on
in
that?
person, they have a storefront here on Knox Street. We'll put in the link to that store in a second. The Real. I think they have decent commission prices. It kind of depends. They're a little bit more, their commissions depend a bit more on like the specific brand,
But yeah, I
I
would say with the brand you're talking about, I'm scared to say it wrong now. I would say that like almost any platform, like you'd have a good chance at selling them just by like brand recognition. But yeah, the Real, I think people, especially if it is a kind of higher quality item, they like it because like most things are authenticated, or like someone else has kind of done other legwork to be like, yes, these are the items and brands they're claiming to be. And so I think especially for that can, I think, be a good way to go with people that trust the platform already to buy the more expensive items.
And if you do like an in-person trend, like so if you go to the Real in person and they think your item is like going to make them a profit, they'll buy the item from you, right? And so you'll get that profit, and then so you don't have to wait for the item to sell. I think that's how the Real World storefront works. I know that's how like other consignment places work,
But
they'll pay
yeah,
you for the item, and then so you're not waiting for the item to sell to make a profit versus like other places where you would have to. Do the buyers get your contact personal info? Not if you do it through the platform.
yeah, so it'll probably, any messages will be probably reserved to the platform, and at the very most, if you have like signed up for email notifications, you'll get an email saying so and so just messaged you on Poshmark, which is what I do to not miss any notifications. Just if you aren't remembering to check the app every day, having it go to your email, I think is the great way to keep up.
Yes. Cool. So we're going to talk about Depop, which we've talked about it a little bit before. This is kind of the platform I've got the most experience in. So I kind of, I've been on it for a while. But Depop has a 10% fee. So again, something to consider when you're making your prices. And Depop is kind of really popular, kind of a little bit more with like the younger crowd, whatever that means. But so it's really good for trends. So like they call them micro trends. And oftentimes you'll see them like on TikTok, some like recently, and like Poochie, that brand was like super popular on TikTok, which translated to like the items on Depop, the price is going up or more people buying that stuff or making that search. So that's what Depop is really good for, is for like kind of like little smaller trends and things like that. Maybe even like personal aesthetics, you know, that are popular, stuff like that. And I think the other thing that Depop is really good for is like building an audience, because
Mhm.
it's really easy to kind of like build your storefront, your kind of like digital storefront on there, and like have all of your items together, make it really look kind of together, a little more professional. And it's also kind of very interactive. When you look at people's listings and like the feed and stuff, it almost kind of reminds you of Instagram. And also you can like follow their people's stores, so you can see when they update and add new stuff. They also have like a really wide range of items and prices. So you can find really contemporary stuff that's like really trendy, but you can also find a lot of like genuinely like vintage goods and rare finds, stuff like that. But I will say that if you're gonna be on Depop, the best way to have success is to have good pictures. And I would even say like good styling of the clothes matters a lot. You have to really like make people envision themselves in the garment. All right. Any questions about Depop?
I think I was muted, but yeah, I would say Depop, people, like it's a really active platform too. And so if you've sold something and you think you may have other things people want to buy, I think it's a really easy way to, even if you don't have a huge following, to get things sold.
Yeah, because especially if like the stuff that you buy, like all kind of has a very similar kind of like aesthetic or style or trend, it's kind of, people will be like, oh, this person posts like they sell these kinds of items regularly. I'm going to follow them because they might, you know,
Right.
eventually put up something that I'm going to want from them. Or like the sizes that they wear are very similar to what I wear. So, you know, that's kind of
Yes.
another good
Yeah.
way
Yeah,
to
I was
think
gonna
about it.
say that with other platforms too. I'm short, and so I'm often seeking petite clothes, and they're usually not available like at the mall. So I was going to say, like, especially like just the size range too. Like if you have petite or tall or sizes that you know yourself are hard to get, I think that's another way too, because people are often looking at these platforms to find an alternative of what they're not getting in person, basically.
Mhm. And I think the last platform we're going to talk about in these like mid to the low to mid platforms is going to be ThreadUp. ThreadUp, I think, is like the complete opposite of Poshmark and a Depop. ThreadUp is actually like an online kind of thrift store, is what they market themselves at. Um, so they do more work. They do kind of way more legwork than you do, but that's also reflected in their fees. So they charge a 20% fee for designer and like luxury goods. And then they'll charge you a 40% fee for like mid-priced brands. So I think ThreadUp is really good if you don't really care that much about making a profit anytime soon. If you care more about getting rid of a bunch of stuff and maybe getting a little bit of extra cash in the process. So basically what ThreadUp does is you can order a bag from them and you can put your items in it and ship it to them, to their warehouses. They'll look through all your items and they'll choose what they want to sell on their platform. Then they'll list your item. And when it sells, you'll get a payout. But the downside is the payouts can be small because they're looking like you're only going to make big money, real money, if you're like selling stuff that's really expensive. And also the payouts take up to 90 days.
Mhm.
Plus the stuff that you send in, it kind of is really up to them what they think is even worth listing and reselling. So you either have to pay a fee to get the stuff that they didn't choose sent back to you, or they just donate it. So I think ThreadUp is good when you just want to get rid of like a bulk of things really
Yeah.
quickly. And if you make some money from it, great. And if you don't, well, you got rid of the stuff at least.
Mhm.
But they do have good stuff on there. I mean, I was searching through it last night and they had a jumpsuit from a Rodarte and Universal Standard collab that is sold out. And it was in my size
Yes.
and it was like less than half price. I thought about it. I really thought about it. I didn't know how much use I was going to get out of it and it was still pricey, but you know, you can find stuff like that on there if you're kind of like really dedicated to looking through the platform. So it is a bit more of that, like, what if a thrift store was online?
Yes, yes. Or
But they
and
have,
like also kind of garage sale-ish too in a way.
yeah, like they have a ton of stuff. Personally, I find ThreadUp hard to use sometimes because I don't like the way they post the clothes. So they
Yeah.
use a mannequin, but the mannequin doesn't have like the arms. So to me, I feel like the items always look distorted or like, I don't know, they look weird to me. But yeah, like ThreadUp's. So to send the items so like basically you send it to them and they take care of everything. That's why their like fees are so high. So once your item sells, I believe the buyer takes care of the shipping fees because I think they offer free shipping after like once you spend $79 and stuff like that. It's just something to consider. Do we have any other questions about ThreadUp? I think we're going to talk about some of the more luxury ones next. Yeah,
Okay.
so is this you or me? I don't remember.
Yeah, I think it's me, but it's fine.
Okay.
But yeah, so some luxury and designer platforms that we're going to mention. Queenly. So Queenly is very specific. But I would say if you have something that fits what they sell, it would be a really good place to go because it's so specific. But Queenly is an app specifically catering to formal wear. And so a lot of full length gowns and just dresses that people would maybe want to wear for special occasions. And so yes, it's only formal wear, and so can kind of, for anyone looking for formal wear trying to sell it, it's really kind of a one-stop shop because it has so many, or has such a specific focus.
Oh, when we were
And
looking at it, they had a collab. They had a collaboration with like beauty pageant contestants,
yeah,
queens. So they were make like, I think once they had used the gowns, the beauty contest pageant contestants would donate their dresses or resell them on Queenly. So that was kind of cool.
yeah. I'm like, we didn't have a lot of big dances or anything where I'm from, but yeah, I think it's especially in Dallas, like people in the general area, I think are looking for formal wear. So read up question.
Yes, they do. They'll send you the bag for free. You only have to pay to get the item sent back to you.
Yeah, so another one we're going to talk about, which I've mentioned a little bit, or we talked about earlier, was the Real Real. And I think a brand is, I think, really important on this app. And especially if it's a classic luxury or designer brand like Louis Vuitton, Chanel, like these kind of other classics, or a nice watch or something like that, I think is a place that, especially people, I think that don't always, maybe buying those kinds of items new is out of reach for them. But going to the Real Real can kind of simulate that experience by giving someone a nice brand and quality item for just a little bit less. And so I think that's something really cool about it. And especially if you have designer things and you want to kind of go with an app that's, I think, reputable when it comes to that, I think it works really well. And so Grailed, the next one on the list, is also similar. And yeah, we can talk about the Goodwill question in just a second, I think, probably. But yeah, just so I can get out Grailed. But Grailed is specifically for menswear. So especially kind of nicer menswear brands. And so I think that's an option too. Again, these the kind of the luxury designer ones are really specific, but I think if you have items that fit them, I think it's a good kind of way to get them sold and moved more quickly, just by kind of really catering to that specific interest. So nice menswear. And I would say it's probably, I think, similar to the Real Real and how it operates, but it's just only menswear. And Vestiaire Collective, is a little, the last two are kind of a little weirder, but I thought they were worth mentioning. But Vestiaire Collective is also, I would say, nicer designer luxury brands, and maybe harder to get items. But the thing that's interesting about that is like it's international in scope. And they also do, as like a company, have a real commitment to just really promoting like circular fashion, which is basically just, you know, having items that are meant to be, you know, go through a life cycle of different people. And so they do, I think, try to the way they do their shipping. And I think I think there's an option for warehouse similar like ThredUp, but I think it's optional. But I think they do try to make an effort to do it in a way that is more sustainable. But yeah, so if you have brands that maybe no one in the US would really care about, but if they're, you know, a rare European designer or things like that, that you do feel like could have an international focus, I think that's a good option. And then, yeah, Gem is a little different. But I thought it was worth mentioning just so if you're listing on another platform, you kind of have this idea. But Gem actually, so it isn't a platform where you can list things for sale. But what it does is it indexes a bunch of other apps and independent stores and things like that that sell vintage. So if you list something on eBay, it will be available in the Gem search engine. And so that's also kind of another way to kind of just, you know, two birds, one stone kind of situation. I know eBay is listed, Etsy is listed on Gem. There's another one. Vestiaire Collective is listed on Gem. And so just if you're doing Etsy or eBay, like we said, kind of those real classics, they also will show up in that search engine. And that platform and search tool is, again, for people that I think are kind of collectors and really interested in buying vintage and unique items. And so that's just kind of the added bonus if you do go with one of kind of the more classic options, is that it's going to show up in this platform as well, without you having to do anything.
Do we have any questions about any of these? I think we only really cover them on this slide.
Yeah.
One thing I did see a comment about getting a listing terminated because they couldn't authenticate. Again, when you're using these platforms, you're kind of subject to their rules. It's kind of one of the downsides, but it's also something that you kind of like should keep in mind when you're selling, especially through somebody else or through a platform like these. I will say the Real Real has a storefront in Dallas. It's on like Tyler or Knox or something like that. And they had some perks for consigning items in store. So I remember there was like a couple of brands that if you did take in one of their items, they would give you $100 credit for the brand. One of the cool things that I saw is if you took in something from Burberry, you could get a free personal styling session at the Burberry store and high tea. So like some of these brands are getting, you know, like are trying to give you more incentive. And the Real Real, I was on there the other day and they have some like really good stuff. If you care about like designer, you know, and like haute couture and that kind of stuff, because they have even kind of like smaller designers, but that are still luxury. So it is kind of like they have pretty good like deals on some of that stuff. All right, next slide. Now we're going to talk a little bit about buying clothes online and sort of what that entails. So why buy used? I mean, there's a lot of different reasons, and I think we've covered a lot of them, but like accessibility, I think in a lot of different like areas in terms of like, you don't have to physically go there to look at something or to find something. Usually you're selling stuff online, you're kind of selling it at a discount, or, you know, like there's an element of like getting a deal to there. And then you can also sort of like, one of the things we maybe like don't think about is how much like buying new things impacts the environment. And so just like reducing the amount of new things and kind of giving old things new life. It's just kind of like one of the reasons. So
Yeah.
some of the precautions.
And yeah, Yvonne, we can kind of go into your question. I think we'll lead from this slide as well.
Okay, so I need to move this over. Things to consider before buying. Again, so like if you're gonna sell, you need to check the terms of service, the protections. Same thing if you're gonna buy, check their terms of service. What kind of customer service do they have? You know, can you find their customer service? Like, can you like figure out how to be like, hey, actually this seller didn't send me what they said they were going to, stuff like that. Always check ratings and reviews. Check when the item was listed. Always double check that. Sometimes stuff will come up in your search, but it's been listed for like maybe a year. Then you're going to want to message the seller, be like, hey, is this item even still available? Are you still active on this platform? You can kind of get some ideas. One of the biggest and most important things to remember is to not make transactions off of the platform, because then you lose any of the protections that you had, any sort of safeguards. So if you met the seller on the platform, but then they're like, oh, just like Venmo me or something like that, you're not going to get, you know, if they don't send you what they said they were going to, or, you know, what they ended up sending you something that was fake or anything like that, you can't file a complaint through that platform. So you can't file a complaint through Poshmark or Etsy or anything like that. And you're basically like, you're out that money. So always be careful. And honestly, I would say that if somebody is pressuring you to go off the platform, they maybe don't have the best of intentions. And, you know, for you, it's just better to stay on the platform so you can keep those your protections. Just try to avoid that in general. And it's nothing against that person or anything like that. It's just, you know, for safety.
Yeah, so Yvonne was asking about returns. So I believe like some platforms, like it's your decision. On Depop, for example, each seller can set their shop policies that kind of come up in each item before someone messages you as a seller. And so as a seller on that platform, you can say, no, I do not accept returns. And on Poshmark, for example, returns on, we'll check with Daisy to see if she knows about other platforms, but I know on Poshmark, the return process isn't as simple as someone saying, I don't like this, I'm sending it back. There has to be kind of a verifiable reason as to why they don't want it. Like, for example, someone could say the photos were blurry and I didn't know what I was getting. And so kind of whether that's true or not, that would count as like legitimate return reason if Poshmark decides. And so that's a process that usually takes a couple of days where someone's actually reviewing the return. And so there is kind of that extra step in there. But yeah, kind of again, making a good listing in the first place, I think can help you avoid a lot of these things. But at least with Poshmark, it's a more formalized process. And yeah, again, with Depop, you can kind of make that decision, like blanket decision, no returns. And I believe on like eBay and Etsy as well, you can kind of mark that as an option, and it's your preference. But yeah, some of the platforms do kind of have these extra protections built in.
Yeah, and I think depending on like why you're selling, sometimes taking returns is not really like,
Yeah.
First of all, it can cut into your profit. But second of all, it's like you're gonna have to relist it and go through all that work again. And then like, is that the point of why you're on there? You know, like you gotta think it through and like what is more convenient for you. But I think that's the case where like the more information you could provide upfront, the better. And, always like they have those in platform messaging systems for a reason. Ask for
Mhm.
more pictures, especially if you're looking for like specific items, rare items, high-end luxury items. Okay, and here we just put out like a little bit of information about some of these other platforms. I'm going to talk about Etsy and Mercari. So I think a lot of you know about Etsy, but buyers, when someone goes to Etsy, they're looking for kind of like unique, one of a kind items. So I would say if you're going to sell on Etsy, it's because you're kind of transforming some of the garments that you have in some way. So you're maybe like, I've seen people who take several different like garments and they make a whole new one out of it, or they, add some sort of personal design touch. So that's kind of like, I think that's kind of what people want to see more on Etsy. I think some people have had really good success with having their own kind of like vintage stores. I follow a store that they source kind of like handmade items made by indigenous people and like indigenous kind of like sewing and weaving traditions and like traditional dress, and they put that on Etsy, and I think Etsy's a great platform for what they're doing, and it gives it kind of a professional storefront. But you got to think about is like how much Etsy takes from your, because they take a percentage, I don't remember how much it is, but you got to think about like that aspect of the platform and what people are looking for. Mercari, I think, is generally a pretty new app. It's very similar. I would say it almost reminds me of like Facebook Marketplace in that like they just have a ton of stuff on there, all kinds of things. I think the two most interesting or maybe compelling reasons that you might like to use Mercari is that they have Mercari Local. So if they'll match buyers and sellers that are nearby, and that way whoever's buying something, they can pay a fee actually to have Mercari like pick up the item and deliver it to them.
Oh, wow.
So that's kind of one of the things to think about. They also offer authentication services for luxury items. If your item's worth more than $100, you can pay $5 to get it authenticated. At that point, you kind of have to decide whether authentication like is worth it, and whether like paying that fee will make you, your item sell and make you the profit. What was I gonna say? I had something else to say about that. Authenticated items do tend to like sell more, or at least sell a little bit quicker than non-authenticated items. So that's something to think about. All right. Did you want to do eBay and
No, I was like, we're running out of time a little bit, right? Did we do longer than an hour?
I don't remember. I think we're okay.
Okay.
We'll finish up.
So eBay, yeah, eBay's a classic. I think that's the first platform when I was younger that I started buying used clothes. And yeah, it's pretty reliable. They use PayPal, which is it's a secure platform. There's, buyer and seller protections. Like they have enough going on for them that they can do actions to both like protect buyer and seller. And yeah, so I think Daisy listed that you can also scan items with barcodes to automatically upload details. And so if it's something, what kind of item would that be, Daisy? Like
basically stuff that you bought in store, or like anything that has a barcode. I don't know if it like works universally, but
yeah,
they advertise that if something has a barcode, you can scan it and get the items like details uploaded automatically. So like it kind of helps. I'm not sure like how great of a service it is. Yeah, but they have that. So to some people, it might appeal to them.
And yeah, and so eBay too, you're kind of really setting the terms with that. And so for instance, like you can have an item where you can have the offer option open for people to almost kind of bid on it. And you can also have the buy it now option on at the same time. And so I see that a lot basically where people kind of decide, well, I want to at least get this much money. And so you could, for example, you could say, it's it's going to, I'm not going to accept lower than $100. But if you keep the offer function open, depending on how much people want your item, they may start bidding for it for more than that buy it now price. So leaving both of those options open kind of gives you a way to make sure that you're making the amount of money you need to be making with the buy it now feature. And then Ukes is kind of weird, and is probably more for, yeah, like on the buyer end as opposed to the seller. But they sell items from nice brands that they have bought that were unsold stock from when it first came out. And so you can get a designer things at a much lower price. And sometimes it is past seasons, but that doesn't really matter to me, especially if it's like a classic item like ballet flats or something like that. And so, yeah, that can be another way to find things for cheaper. And again, instead of kind of letting that unsold stock go to waste, it's still, you know, people still want to buy it. And so it's still being put into circulation. So yeah, just in case, yeah, you want another place to kind of see if you can find less expensive designer stuff.
Now we're going to talk about kind of a different way to sort of like sell your clothes, which is to actually sell it back directly to some of the brands you bought it from. So this isn't like a universal kind of thing, but they're called buyback programs. And essentially, like a brand or a store is going to offer you, the customer, either in-store credit or actual cash to return your like gently worn or used items from them. Right. And then they take that item and then they either resell it or they upcycle it or recycle it, stuff like that. And so that's a good, you know, like it's a good option for you if you like buy from that brand. It's something that's going to become, I think, more common in the future, because I think Net-a-Porter just announced their buyback program and stuff like that. So you've got Madewell. I think it's only for their jeans. But if you bought a pair of jeans from them, you can take it back and they'll give you credit to buy other things in their store. And Patagonia, North Face, Rachel Comey, Mara Hoffman. So some of these, it's not like I don't think it's like huge right now, but I think we're going to see more of it in the future. Yeah, it's going to increase. But that's another thing to think about when you shop for something. Like, does this brand buy back items?
Right.
And I think Urban Outfitters is either going to do something very similar to this, or they're going to do their own type of consignment, something like that.
Yeah. And yeah, like with Patagonia and North Face, like it's a great way to just kind of, for them to build brand loyalty, but for you to kind of know that when it's time for a new thing, that there's, you know, a process to do that. And it's just, again, not a used thing going to waste. So.
And then we know this is about like online selling and buying and stuff. And we did want to talk about some kind of like local stores here in Dallas where you can kind of do something similar. I actually bought my shirt, my Selena shirt. I bought this at Buffalo Exchange here in Dallas. That's why I wore it today. But, you know, like you can find cool stuff at some of these places and you can sell your stuff to them. I will say I like some stores better than others in terms of like how they buy items. I saw a little bit too much of like stuff from Shein or stuff from Forever 21. I won't say which store, but like I did see a little bit too much of it, to like more than I would like to see. But there's Crossroads Trading, Uptown Cheapskate, I think Dolly Python. They actually have a few stores. They have some like really cool stuff in there. I think my mom's actually bought like silver jewelry at Dolly Python.
Yeah, silver, that I forgot to mention, that things that are silver or 14 karat gold or anything like that too, like people are searching for it. They want it, either to use the item as is or to recycle. Again, kind of people just are in the mind of kind of like what can we repurpose? And yeah, so some of these stores maybe kind of work on like a consignment option, and then some of them are kind of like Buffalo Exchange. You bring all of your clothes and then they go through them with you and decide if they can take them. And sometimes some of them are kind of like, you know, with a unique vintage dress, it doesn't really matter what season it is, for the most part. that if it's summer and you go to Buffalo Exchange and you only have sweaters and summer's just starting, they probably won't take them. And so doing seasonal selling too, I think is another great thing, especially in Texas, where I feel like as soon as we have a chilly day, like the next day, everyone is looking for a coat at the thrift store. And so, yeah, just kind of keeping that in mind too, especially with some of the in-person places. If you have a lot of nice cashmere things and, you know, it's fall, autumn, you can probably get rid of them pretty easily.
And I think that covers it for today. We've got some of our,
Just
So-
articles to learn more.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Um,
it was really cool to share all of this with you.
do we have any like questions or anything you guys want to talk about before we end today's program? This was really fun. I liked seeing everybody's questions and comments and stuff. They're in like what kind of experiences they've had on some of these platforms. So I mean, honestly, like the best way to learn about these platforms is to actually download and use them or log on to their websites. That's how you're going to get the best idea of like what people are
Yeah.
looking for on there, what gets on the trending pages. Yeah, we'll send the slides after the presentation and probably some resources and links as well.
Yeah, no, and yeah, I think just browsing and just searching, it doesn't have to be complicated. So for a while I was really chasing like linen clothing. So like you can just type in linen and you can see all the different ways people are talking about it. And yeah, get an idea of what's selling. But yeah, thank you guys so much. And yeah, we're gonna send out the resources. And yeah, I kind of consider this to be part of, you know, like internet literacy and stuff. So like if you have questions, like I would be down to answer them. So yeah, we'll be around if you want to get in contact and you have any questions.
Kat, did you see Andrea's question?
Yeah,
I'm trying to think.
I think I know Poshmark has some things.
I feel like we say Poshmark a lot, but it's really because like there's just a large variety of stuff on there.
Yes, yeah. It's pretty quick turnover too. And so yeah, it might, if there are any brand names or things like that, it might just be worth typing it in and then you can see if someone is selling it, like how are they doing it basically. But yeah, Poshmark is kind of, I think, a go-to if you don't know where to start.
Mhm. Yeah, that's gonna be it for today. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. Yeah, if you have any questions before we finish up, otherwise we can go ahead and end the program. Yeah, we'll send it later, probably later today.
Thank you all so much.